Love me tender, love me dear.
It was a sweltering summer night in 1975. The grand stage in Nashville burned like a sea of fire. More than 20,000 fans packed the arena, their cheers thundering as they awaited Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll. When the lights went dark and the opening guitar of C.C. Rider rang out, the crowd erupted. Elvis strode onto the stage, tall and commanding in a white jumpsuit trimmed with gold. A silk scarf draped loosely around his neck. Applause and screams drowned out even the band. The air was electric, as if the building itself might explode. But amid that sea of people, in the 8th row, sat a man who did not move. His shirt was plain, his face weathered by the sun, his eyes deep and heavy, and most of all, his body broken. One of his legs was gone. The empty pant leg was neatly tucked to the side, a wooden crutch leaning against his chair. He was a veteran recently returned from Vietnam. His name was John Miller. 3 years earlier, a landmine had stolen his right leg, and with it, much of his youth. Yet tonight, John had come with one wish: to see Elvis, the man whose music had given him the strength to endure the long, dark months in the military hospital. As Elvis launched into burning love, the arena roared. Fans leapt, clapped, and screamed. Lost in the fever of the song, John wanted to join them. His heart pounded with the need to show his respect, but his crutch and his fragile body betrayed him. Still, he gripped the crutch tight and pushed with all his remaining strength. The chair rattled as he rose, balancing on his one good leg. Slowly, trembling, John stood. With a shaking hand, he raised his arm in salute to Elvis. The spotlight caught him. Elvis froze mid-lyric, his blue eyes locked on John's. Across a sea of thousands, their gazes met, one a blazing star, the other a broken soldier, standing firm on a single leg. The crowd didn't notice at first, still roaring in frenzy. But Elvis did, and in that instant, he didn't see a faceless fan. He saw himself a poor boy from Tupelo who had once dreamed of singing for the world. He saw his own father's struggles. He saw the cost of war written on one man's body. Elvis stopped singing. The band faltered, then fell silent. The crowd's cheers died away in confusion. Elvis lowered the microphone, stepped forward, his eyes fixed only on the man in the 8th row. Silence thickened, pressing on every chest. Elvis bowed deeply, an act almost unheard of on a concert stage. Then, his voice rolled through the stillness. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight, we have a true hero among us." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Elvis pointed toward John. Thousands of heads turned. All eyes fell on the trembling veteran. His hand still raised, tears glistening in his eyes. Elvis's smile was gentle, but his gaze shone with respect. And then he did the unthinkable. He stepped off the stage, leaving behind the lights, the instruments, the spectacle. Elvis walked straight into the crowd, toward the 8th row. The arena fell utterly still. No one had ever seen Elvis halt a show like this. But tonight, the music wasn't the most important thing. What mattered was the handshake, the eye contact, the simple recognition between a star and a soldier who had already given too much. When Elvis placed a hand on John's shoulder, the crowd held its breath. No words were needed. The moment itself was louder than any song. The concert had taken a turn no one could have imagined. Elvis's warm hand rested on John Miller's shoulder. In that instant, the spotlight seemed to fade. There were no thousands, no roaring crowd, only two men, a star and a soldier, facing each other in silence. The arena of 20,000 held its breath. Elvis leaned down, his voice husky but gentle. "You're the true hero here. Would you come up on stage with me?" John froze. His eyes widened, tears spilling. He shook his head. "No, I don't deserve that." Elvis tightened his grip, his gaze unwavering. "You deserve it more than anyone." Then Elvis clasped John's hand and slowly guided him toward the stage. The crowd parted instinctively, whispers and muffled sobs breaking through. A few other veterans in the audience rose, saluting John. Suddenly, the concert felt less like a show and more like a solemn ceremony. As they neared the steps, John trembled, his crutch striking heavy against the floor, but Elvis walked beside him, arm outstretched as if to lift the entire weight of the world. On stage, John hesitated, blinded by the lights and the gaze of thousands. Panic flickered across his face. Elvis whispered, "Sit with me. We'll sing for them, and for all who never made it home." He pulled up a chair beside the piano and helped John sit. Then he sat down beside him, draping an arm gently around his shoulders. No grand introduction, no spectacle, just a simple act that spoke louder than anything words could say. Elvis's fingers touched the keys. The first notes of "Love Me Tender" drifted out, tender as a prayer. The crowd went utterly silent. His voice rose, warm and pleading. "Love me tender. Love me, sweet. Never let me go." John bowed his head, tears streaming down his weathered face. He pressed his hand against his heart, as if to hold the song there forever. The arena of 20,000 remained motionless. No cheers, no applause, only the sound of piano, of voice, of human hearts breaking open. At the chorus, Elvis leaned toward John, his voice soft but strong. "Sing with me." John's voice cracked, hoarse and fragile, but he sang, "Love me tender. Love me true." The soldier's broken voice entwined with Elvis's timeless one. It was imperfect, unpolished, but it carried the weight of loss, the scars of war, and the pride of survival. Elvis held him close, eyes shut, tears streaking down his cheeks. Together, they sang not just to the crowd, but to the ghosts of the fallen. When the song ended, no applause came at first. A long silence hung heavy, pierced only by stifled sobs. Then, suddenly, the entire arena rose to its feet. Applause thundered, not wild, but solemn, like a salute. Elvis stood, bowed, then lifted John to his feet. He raised the soldier's arm high, as if lifting a symbol itself. The crowd roared, "USA, USA!" Veterans saluted through tears. That night's concert had become something greater, a memorial, a hymn for sacrifice, a moment none would ever forget. That night, Nashville was wrapped in an unusual silence after the show. No one rushed for the exits, as if they had just witnessed something far more sacred than music. Thousands stood still, wiping away tears, holding one another close. In their memories, the moment Elvis helped a one-legged veteran onto the stage would outlast any hit song or legendary performance. By the next morning, Nashville's newspapers blazed with headlines. The front page of the Tennessean read, "Elvis Presley stops the show to honor a soldier." A photograph of Elvis raising John Miller's arm high spread quickly, becoming a symbol of music intertwined with patriotism. But what moved people most was not the image, but the story behind it. In a brief backstage interview, Elvis said, "He's given more than anyone in this room. I just did the least I could let him know. We honor him." Those words made national headlines from New York to Los Angeles. In ordinary homes and in veterans' hospitals, the story spread. One journalist wrote, "Last night, Elvis was no longer the king of rock. He became the voice of a wounded nation." In military hospitals, wounded soldiers gathered around old radios to hear the news. Many wept silently. One whispered, "Maybe we're not forgotten. Maybe someone still sees us." John Miller returned to his modest apartment. Overwhelmed, he carried with him the white scarf Elvis had handed him after the show. Soaked with sweat, it became his most treasured possession. He hung it on his wall like a flag. To John, it wasn't just a souvenir, it was proof that his sacrifice had meaning. The story spread far beyond Nashville. Across America, letters poured into Graceland, thousands from veterans and their families, offering gratitude. One mother wrote, "My son died in Vietnam. Last night, when I saw Elvis embrace a veteran, I felt as if my boy was held one last time." Elvis read the letters, often crying quietly. He confided to Joe Esposito, "Joe, I've sung for millions, but maybe last night was the first time I sang for a nation that's broken." From that night on, Elvis's concerts carried a new weight. He often mentioned the soldiers in his introductions, sometimes dedicating American Trilogy to them. Fans didn't just come to hear music anymore, they came to share in grief. To feel that amid division and loss, there was still space for healing. Years later, those who were there told their children and grandchildren they had witnessed one of the most sacred moments in American music history. Not when Elvis stood in glory, but when he bowed before a soldier with one leg. A journalist wrote, "War took John Miller's leg, but Elvis's music and compassion gave him wings to live forever in the memory of a nation." After that fateful night in Nashville, Elvis Presley was no longer the same man. He still wore glittering jumpsuits, still sang before tens of thousands, but his eyes had changed. They were deeper, heavier, carrying within them the memory of John Miller, the one-legged veteran, and the invisible pain of an entire generation. Those close to him said Elvis often sat in silence after shows. He no longer rushed to after-parties as he once did. Instead, he lingered alone in his dressing room, staring at the white scarf he had given John and received back after the concert. It bore stains of sweat and tears, a living reminder that the moment had not been a performance, but a meeting of souls. Charlie Hodge, his longtime friend, recalled Elvis once saying in a hushed, breaking voice, "Charlie, I've sung for the whole world, but maybe that night was the first time I truly sang for a man's heart." The event shifted Elvis's view of his career. Music was no longer just the road to stardom, it was a mission to heal and connect. After Nashville, he deliberately added songs steeped in American spirit, ballads of peace and loss, into his setlists. American Trilogy became a staple, always dedicated to veterans. Each time he sang it, he closed his eyes, as if sending a prayer for the fallen. Fans noticed the change. A woman once wrote to Rolling Stone magazine, "I used to listen to Elvis for joy, to dance. But after Nashville, when I saw him sing for a soldier, I began listening with my heart." He turned music into a prayer. To journalists, Elvis became a symbol standing against the nation's division. While many artists stayed silent or avoided the subject of war, Elvis chose to step down from the stage and embrace a soldier. Critics began to call him the artist who dared to bow. But most importantly, Elvis found redemption for himself. At that time, he was exhausted, burdened by pressure, by pills, by loneliness fame could not fill. Yet in the moment he sang "Love Me Tender" with John. He realized music still mattered not for the roaring crowd, but for one heart in need. And that realization was medicine for his soul. Joe Esposito recalled Elvis often mentioning John in private talks. He would say, "If a soldier can stand tall on one leg to salute me, then I can stand firm on my shaky legs to keep singing for them." From then on, every time Elvis walked on stage, he no longer saw himself as just a star. He saw each performance as a chance for someone in the audience to find peace, a flicker of hope, and perhaps that is why fans felt his later voice, though raspier and wearier, touched them more deeply than ever. Nashville didn't just change John Miller that night. It changed Elvis Presley himself. Decades have passed since that night in Nashville, 1975. Yet its echo remains, not only in John Miller's heart, the one-legged veteran, but in an entire generation who witnessed it. And even in those who only heard the story retold, John later became a symbol in the veteran community. He was often invited to speak at memorial events, and each time he recalled the night Elvis held his hand on stage. He would say, "War took my leg, but Elvis gave me back the pride to stand tall with my heart." That line was quoted endlessly in newspapers, becoming an unspoken motto among American veterans. At Graceland, a large photograph is preserved, Elvis raising John Miller's arm beneath the blinding lights. Visitors often stand silently before it, some in tears, realizing that behind the king of rock and roll was a man who bowed before sacrifice for Elvis. The Nashville moment became part of his legacy, equal to his greatest hits. When he passed in 1977, newspapers didn't only print pictures of him on stage in glory, they also printed that image of him with John Miller. A journalist wrote, "Perhaps that was Elvis's true eternal love song, not for fame, but for those who sacrificed and for a nation in pieces." The story lived on in documentaries, in tribute songs, and in veteran memorial concerts. Elvis was remembered not just for his voice, but for the night he stopped, stepped down, and turned a concert into a prayer. Today, when people recall the most moving moments of Elvis's career, Nashville cannot be left out. It was not just a concert, it was proof that the highest form of art is not found in dazzling lights, but in the power to touch the human soul. Elvis Presley left this world, but that night ensured his name lives not only in the history of music, but in the history of compassion. Nashville didn't just host a performance. It holds a legend where a star and a one-legged soldier sang together an immortal song. That night in Nashville, Elvis was no longer the king of rock and roll. He was simply a man, bowing before pain, singing beside a soldier, broken in body but unbroken in spirit. And in that moment, Elvis wrote his name into history not only of music, but of compassion.